Did you know that Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world? Yep, you heard that right. So, how did a cola brand end up with a military fleet? Stick around because we're uncovering how capitalism, communism, and a little creativity turned Pepsi into a naval powerhouse, even if just for a moment. To understand this insane story, we have to go back to the Cold War, an era defined by tensions between the US and the Soviet Union. Each superpower tried to outdo the other in every way, from space exploration to military arsenals, and even everyday consumer goods. The Cold War, lasting from the late 40s to the early 90s, was a geopolitical and ideological conflict primarily between the United States, representing capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union, representing communism and a planned economy. While no direct military confrontation occurred between these superpowers, their rivalry shaped global politics, economics, and societies. The Cold War began after World War II, as the Allied powers divided Europe and Asia. Tensions arose over ideological differences. The US promoted free market and democratic governance, while the Soviet Union supported communism and state-controlled economies. Some key events included the division of Germany, Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, and the formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Both superpowers heavily invested in these defense industries, fostering the growth of the military-industrial complex. US defense spending during the Cold War led to technological innovations that later benefited civilian markets, such as the internet and aerospace. Enormous resources were allocated to nuclear and conventional weapons, often at the expense of consumer goods and infrastructure, especially in the USSR. The arms race influenced global trade as countries aligned with either superpower for weapons and aid. The capital world, led by the US, promoted free trade through institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The communist bloc, led by the USSR, established Comecon, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, to manage intra-bloc trade. Investment in space technology spurred advancements in computing, telecommunications, and satellite technology, which had long-term economic impacts. The Cold War shifted economic priorities in emerging markets, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Nations aligned with the US often received financial aid and investments fostering economic growth, for example, South Korea and Taiwan. Those aligned with the USSR received aid but struggled economically due to inefficiencies in the planned economic model. Hollywood played a massive role in marketing Western ideals. Movies, music, and even comic books were packaged as entertainment but doubled as cultural exports. Spy thrillers like James Bond made Western intelligence look suave, while bands like the Beatles became global sensations, spreading Western pop culture far and wide. On the flip side, Eastern Bloc cinema promoted themes of sacrifice, collective effort, and socialist ideals, though it didn't quite achieve the same global reach. Did you know that McDonald's used pop culture to its advantage, opening its first Soviet location in Moscow in 1990? On the opening day, thousands of people lined up not just for burgers but for a taste of the West. The Cold War era blurred the lines between advertising and propaganda. In the West, advertisements emphasized choice, luxury, and individuality. Think of flashy car commercials or campaigns featuring idyllic suburban life. These ads subtly or not so subtly said, "This is what freedom looks like." Meanwhile, state-sponsored ads in the East focused on collective well-being. Posters showcased workers thriving in harmony, often with slogans like "For the glory of the motherland." These campaigns weren't just selling a product, they were selling the system. So, what's the moral of the story? Marketing wasn't just about goods, it was about convincing people their system of life was superior in all spheres. The rivalry between the US and the USSR was very strong. The rivalry was intense, with each side competing to show the superiority of their economic and social systems. And that's where Pepsi, an American icon, unexpectedly became a part of Cold War politics. It all started in 1959 at the American National Exhibition in Moscow. The US held this event to showcase American culture, technology, and of course consumer products. During the exhibition, a famous moment unfolded, the kitchen debate, where then Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev debated the virtues of capitalism and communism. And guess who made a surprising cameo during this heated discussion? Pepsi. Pepsi's Vice President Donald Kendall saw a golden opportunity. He handed Khrushchev a Pepsi, making it the first American product publicly enjoyed by a Soviet leader. That sip marked the beginning of an unlikely business relationship that would lead Pepsi straight into Soviet markets. Fast forward to 1972, Pepsi finally broke into the Soviet market. But here's the thing. Because of Cold War restrictions, the Soviet ruble wasn't accepted internationally. They couldn't just pay Pepsi in cash. So how did they work around it? They came up with a creative solution: bartering. The Soviets agreed to trade their famous Stolinyaya vodka in exchange for Pepsi syrup. This exchange allowed Pepsi to bring cola to Soviet citizens, while the Soviets gained a valuable export to the United States. And just like that, Pepsi became a Cold War player, operating in a currency-free deal with one of America's biggest rivals. Here's a fun question for you all. If you had to trade something for a lifetime supply of your favourite drink, what would it be? Let us know in the comments. Everything was going smoothly until 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The US responded with economic sanctions, cutting off the import of certain Russian goods, including vodka. Suddenly, the vodka for cola trade was off the table, and the Soviet Union needed a new way to pay for Pepsi. That's when things took an even stranger turn. The Soviets, still desperate to keep Pepsi flowing to their citizens, proposed a jaw-dropping trade: military equipment. In 1989, Pepsi agreed to receive a fleet of Soviet warships in exchange for cola. This included 17 submarines, a cruiser, a destroyer, and a frigate. What's the value of this trade? A whopping $3 billion. For a brief time, Pepsi became the owner of one of the largest naval fleets in the world, technically the 6th largest. Can you imagine a soda company owning more military power than most nations? Of course, Pepsi didn't have any plans for world domination, and they certainly weren't about to start patrolling international waters. Pepsi's CEO at the time, Donald Kendall, famously joked to a US national security advisor saying, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are. It's not every day a cola company takes part in international diplomacy." Imagine a world where Pepsi actually kept those submarines. What do you think would happen if Pepsi and Coca-Cola had a naval battle? Who'd win? Comment below with your take on the ultimate cola war. While Pepsi's ownership of submarines made headlines, the company had no interest in maintaining a navy, so they did the logical thing. They sold the entire fleet to a Swedish scrap merchant. By scrapping the submarines, Pepsi turned its brief military venture into cash, keeping its business profitable and politics free. But think about it. Pepsi had successfully navigated an international barter that involved alcohol, soda, and ultimately submarines. Not many companies can claim that level of creativity. Alright, that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's weirdest business stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And remember, sometimes the craziest stories come from the most unexpected places. Until next time, keep sipping on history.